pick up here at verse 5. Listen to the words of our Lord Jesus Christ. He says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. If you have your Bibles open, I invite you just to leave them open because we'll go through kind of verse by verse, especially if it's your own Bible. Feel free to mark in it as any kind of ideas may strike you. We'll begin in Matthew 5:5 where Jesus says this, "Blessed are the meek, for they'll inherit the earth." I always wondered about this word meek. It's not a word that we use very often, but meek is a word that means one who is not overly impressed with themselves. A synonymous word might be humble. In fact, some of your translations may say humble. A meek person is a person who will enjoy life because they're able to remove their own self-importance from every situation that they're in. And when you're able to remove your own self-importance, you're able just to enjoy what's there. On the contrast, on the other hand of it, the people who are not meek, who are opposite of meek, want to control every situation that they're in. They want to be in control of each one of those moments. So to illustrate this, I'll tell you a story. You may have heard me tell this, but it bears repeating. It's a good one. There was an American investment banker who found himself in a tiny little Mexican village on the coast. And one morning, as he was sitting out by the coast, he saw a boat rowing into shore. And as he looked into this boat, he saw that this Mexican fisherman had caught this most beautiful yellowfin tuna. And he inquired of him. He said, "If you don't mind me asking, how long did it take you to catch that fish?" And he said, "Oh, not very long." And again, the American asked this Mexican fisherman, he said, "Well then, if it didn't take you very long, what do you do with the rest of your day?" And he said, "Well, I like to go spend some time with my kids playing on the beach. I like to take a siesta with my wife. And in the evenings, I like to go into town and drink a little wine with my amigos and play the guitar." And he said, "Well, I'm glad that I came here to talk to you then today because I can make you far more productive than you are. Let me tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to encourage you to spend a little bit more time out the boat, to catch a few extra fish, and you can use the revenue from those extra fish to buy more boats. And then those boats will eventually bring in more revenue that can grow your company. Okay? And then eventually you'll have to move your little company that's growing to Mexico City where you can control more of the flow from the consumer to the producer. You can do that better in a larger city. So you'll move to Mexico City until it becomes a large enough corporation that you can eventually go to the States. You go to Los Angeles probably first, and then eventually New York. And once you get to New York, you'll be able to manage your ever-expanding fishing empire from there. It's going to be great because this tuna that you catch is marvelous. And then the Mexican fisherman said to the American, "Well, how long will that take?" The American said, "Maybe 15 or 20 years. But here's the good part. After that 15 or 20 years, you can sell your business for millions of dollars." And the Mexican fisherman said, "Well, then what will I do with $1 million?" And the American said, "This is the best part of it. You can take your millions of dollars and retire on some small Mexican coastal village where you spend your days playing with your children on the beach, taking siestas with your wife, and drinking wine with your amigos and playing the guitar." Isn't it funny how what we want our whole life has always been just right there? You know, the thing about people who spend their life building their fortune, people who spend their life establishing their reputation, people who spend their life securing their investments and making a name for themselves. You know what happens to people who spend their life? Well, they spend their life instead of living. But Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek." Blessed are those who can remove their self-importance from any given situation. Next time you're anxious about something, the next time you're struggling with something, I want you just to remember this sermon and sort of pause and say, why is it that I'm anxious? Is it because I want control over this situation? And if it is the case, then maybe you need a new set of questions. Like who in this situation are the people that God has given me to enjoy? What are the resources in this situation? The food, the music, the beauty this situation that God has given me to enjoy? What are the challenges in this situation that God has given me to enjoy? That begins to reshape any scenario that we're in. It begins to orient us toward a meekness. Now you may say, well, Pastor, are you saying there's no circumstances where we can be upset? No, I think that there are circumstances where we can be upset. We're supposed to be upset at the same thing that God's upset with, which is sin. But here's what I think. 9 times out of 10 when we're upset in a given situation, it's not because of sin. It's because we're not in control. So we can begin to step back from that and say, look, if I don't have control over this situation, what should I do? Well, if you can't control it, enjoy it. And I don't mean to be flip about that, but really look at the world around us. We've been given such beauty, such wonderful people around us, such great music. We've been given so many things that are a great blessing for us to enjoy. What an affront to God if we say, no, I can't enjoy this situation because I can't control it. We're supposed to enjoy all that God has given us. Not necessarily control. To control is God's job. To enjoy is our part. That's why Jesus says here, blessed are the meek. Why? Because they'll be able to enjoy the earth that God has given them. Their inheritance is the inheritance of the earth. Let's see what he says next, though. Blessed are those, and this is Matthew 5:6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Righteousness. That's a word that we like to toss around, but often, again, we may not necessarily connect to its meaning. Righteousness means this. It means that we have a right standing before God. That if we were to stand before God right now, that he would be pleased with us. He would be delighted in us because we have a right standing. But here's the thing. None of us have a righteousness of our own. None of us. Now, I know that some people might disagree on that particular point. Maybe, maybe not. But you can at least agree with this, that every one of us at some point in our life has felt ashamed. We felt ashamed of something that we've done. Now, if that's true, then we know that that's the opposite of righteousness, that feeling of shame, having to stand before God with that reality. So the question really becomes, what are you going to do about that? Because we will stand before God. Popular culture and popular religion will tell us that the answer to that question, what are we going to do about our guilt and our shame? The answer to that question is, well, you become a better person. You become a more righteous person. You work on your righteousness, and that's what you should do about that feeling of guilt or shame. This is so deeply embedded in our culture. It's why self-help books are so popular. It's why prosperity gospel is just brimming at the edges. It's because there's a belief. We want to believe that we can make ourselves become more righteous people. Unfortunately, we can't. James and Larry and I have had a conversation before. We were talking about James's work at hospice. And he says, you know, it's one of the most tragic things when there's someone on their deathbed and they look up to the chaplain and say, Chaplain, I hope I've done enough to get to heaven. Well, I'm glad I get to address this here with you before you're on your deathbed. Because then it's not a very pastoral circumstance to say this, but it's true. If you're asking, I hope I've done enough, let me go ahead and give you the answer. You haven't. You've not done enough. Even if you do righteousness and nothing but righteousness from this day until the day that you die, it won't be enough to get to heaven. You don't have a righteousness of your own. So what is the message here? Well, what Jesus is trying to teach us is to approach God like a starving man on the streets. To beg for righteousness from the one person who does have it, Jesus Christ. And this is the difference between real and authentic Christianity and every other religion in the world. Test it if you don't believe me. Pick any religion. And here's what they fundamentally teach at its very core. We're going to teach you how to be a more righteous person. But that is not the message of Christianity. The message of Christianity is to teach us how to become desperate beggars, desperately hungry, desperately thirsty for a righteousness that we don't have, to beg from Jesus Christ, who has righteousness and who has it in abundance and who is willing to give it. Friends, this is why Jesus says here, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Why? Why are they so blessed? Because they will be filled. When we seek righteousness from Christ, we will receive it. Matthew 5:7, Jesus says this. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Mercy is the full employment of the human capacity to exercise empathy. Now, I spent a lot of time on that sentence, so I'm going to say it again. Mercy is the full employment of the human capacity to exercise empathy. Empathy is different than sympathy. I learned that when I was doing my clinical work as a chaplain. Sympathy is feeling sorry for someone. Empathy is feeling what that person feels. So how does that extreme empathy play into mercy? Well, I think usually when we think about mercy, we most often think of it in a courtroom situation, so let's start there. Let's say that you are the victim of a violent crime, and you're standing in the courtroom, and your perpetrator's there. You would expect, at least initially, that the full measure of justice would be brought down upon your perpetrator. That's what we hope for most of the time. Indeed. But as the perpetrator begins to explain his life a little bit, he begins to say, I was raised in a place where I didn't have parents to teach me from right from wrong. I got mixed in with a group of people that I really didn't want to be associated with, but I had no other choice because they were the only kind of support network. And then they explained the day of the crime, how it was really a moment of desperation. It doesn't excuse the crime. But sometimes, and not always, sometimes when this happens and victims are able to hear the circumstances that led to the crime, they're often able to feel what the perpetrator feels. They're able to empathize to some degree and ask the judge for mercy. Doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. So how does that play out in our regular relationships? Well, how do you respond when you see someone in your life and in your relationships who's hurting? How do you respond when you see someone who's struggling with something? I think there are a couple of ways we respond generally. One of them is, especially if you're a guy. Now, I'm going to say guys and girls here, and I do so in generalizations. They cross over both ways. Some guys do what girls lean into, and some girls do what guys lean into. But guys, when they see someone hurting and struggling, we will often try and do this. We'll try to fix it. And what we're doing there is we recognize that you're hurting, you're struggling, and we don't want you to hurt or struggle. So we try to fix whatever's going wrong in your life as you're hurting and struggling. It seems on the surface to be a noble thing, but as you really begin to think about it, if you just try to fix what someone else is going through, it's really a way for us to avoid having to be empathetic, avoid having to feel their struggle, having to feel their hurt. We'd rather fix what's going wrong with you than feel what's going wrong with you. So it's a way to avoid that empathy. Now, if my wife were here, she'd be nodding, and some of you women, if you're not even nodding externally, you're nodding internally, saying, yeah, that's what guys do. But women do this too. They do it a different way. They do it in what's sometimes called meddling. and this happens when women will say, I see what's going wrong with you. You know what you should have done. Or they'll either do this directly or indirectly for other people. Or, what you should feel is this. What you should have done is this. As a way of saying, what you are doing and what you are feeling is illegitimate. You should be doing something different. Again, it's a way to sort of avoid the feelings that they're feeling, the struggle that they're struggling with. So sometimes we try to fix. Sometimes we try to ignore. I heard a funny way of ignoring someone. When you see someone's going through some struggle, a funny saying was this: that's not my circus, and those aren't my monkeys. No way to set them back. But isn't it really just a way to say, to conveniently say, mind your own business? But yet it is another way to avoid other people's feelings. It's a way to avoid other people's struggles. So there's a third option. When you see someone hurting and struggling, what you can do is go to them with no agenda, except just to feel what they feel. You can go to them with no agenda except just to struggle with them in the way that they're struggling. That's a merciful friend. It seems like if you felt their pain and you felt their struggle, that it wouldn't feel good. That's what I initially thought, but I still sometimes struggle with. But in my limited experience of sharing in mercy, you know what? It feels good. It feels good to be merciful. It feels good to receive mercy. And I think that the reason is that God made us for each other. God made us for each other so that we wouldn't feel alone. And you know what? Alone doesn't just mean that you're physically by yourself. There are people who can be alone in a crowded room. They can feel very emotionally alone. And so a merciful person finds them in that spot and says, I want to feel what you feel. I want to struggle where you struggle. We're not meant to be alone. That's why I think mercy resonates with this deep and primal part of us. It reminds us that God made us to be helpers for each other. When we show mercy to others, it also makes us willing to receive mercy. This is not always an easy thing. A lot of people have their guards up. They don't want to share their feelings. They don't want to let people in where they are alone. But when we're able to actually share mercy with someone and feel that it feels good, it becomes easier for us to begin to receive mercy as well. You know, ironically, this is the way our relationship with God works too. If we're not aware that God is a merciful God, we will fail to come to Him. Let me show you what I mean. If you don't believe that God is a merciful God, and then you commit sin, let's say you lusted, and you say, God would never accept my lustful mind, so I can't come to God. I hear people say things like this all the time. I mean, you may kind of brush it off and say, no, I don't think that way, but a lot of people do. Or they say, I cheated on my test, I cheated on my taxes, I cheated on my spouse. God will never forgive that. And there's a lot of people who think that. But they say, I've done a despicable, a shameful, a secret thing, and God wouldn't understand why I did it. We don't understand that God is a merciful God, primarily because we don't think God can empathize with us, know where we're at, feel what we feel, struggle where we struggle. But I want to read to you another passage from Scripture. This one comes from Hebrews 4, verses 15 through 16. Just listen to this one. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness. But we have one who in every respect has been tempted as we are. This is amazing. In every way that you've been tempted. Just think about it. How have you been tempted lately? In every way that you have felt a real feeling of temptation, God in Jesus Christ has too. He knows what it feels like to be tempted in that way. In every way that you've been tempted, God has too, yet without sin. Let us therefore approach the throne of grace with boldness. Now I know that you'd say, well, I don't feel bold about my sin. And you shouldn't feel bold about your sin, but that's not what this verse is talking about. This verse says we should feel bold about the Christ who covers our sin when we approach the throne of grace. We approach with boldness so that we may receive what? Mercy. We may receive mercy and find grace to help in a time of need. In Jesus Christ, God fully understands why you sin. That doesn't mean He condones it, but He fully feels it and understands why you sin. Which is why when we approach God in Jesus Christ, instead of receiving wrath, we receive mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Matthew 5:8, the last of the verses we'll read today, Jesus says this. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. God made us really good at getting what we want. I don't know if you know that or not. God made us really good at getting what we desire. And desire in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It just depends on what it is you desire. Let me give you some examples. If you desire money, even lots of money, it's not that hard to get. I mean, I know the way the economy is, sometimes you think, yeah, it is. But seriously, if you ask a person who's done really well in gaining money in their lifetime, they'll say, you know, it's really not that hard. What it takes is, yes, a little bit of skill, but mostly what it takes is study and discipline and time. If you really want money more than anything else, you can get it. Or family. A lot of people want family. It's not an easy thing to have, but it's not unattainable. Many of us do have families. Or maybe what you want, even go to the other extreme of the considerations here. Let's say you're an alcoholic and one thing you really want is booze. Look at an alcoholic on the street who's lost everything. I bet I can tell you one thing that they do have. I bet they've got their booze. God made us really good at having the desires of our heart. But a pure heart is one that wants one thing. The one thing it was made for. A pure heart wants God. A pure heart has a singular desire for God. Now, finding a pure heart, that's a trickier thing. And it's tricky, not only in other people, it's tricky to notice it in ourselves. And here's why. Because we don't see hearts. What we see are actions. And so it's entirely possible for someone to have a selfish heart, and yet their actions would appear pure. We don't see hearts. We see actions. It's entirely possible for even ourselves, for us to help others, for us to, say, give money to the poor, for us to give food to the hungry, for us to give our time to the lonely. And we do so not out of a desire that we see God, not out of a pure heart, but out of a desire that others would think we have a pure heart. Or maybe even out of a desire that we would convince ourselves that we have a pure heart. See, these intentions, these motivations, they're tricky things. The Scripture tells us that the heart is deceptive above all. Our heart has a tendency to deceive us in its desires. I don't know, maybe you guys are philosophers. If not, you might not have read Plato's book called The Republic. It's a really influential book. If you haven't read it, maybe you won't, but I would recommend it. It's influenced our culture and our Western civilization probably more than any other book except the Bible. In that book, Plato writes about Adamantes and Socrates, and they're having this conversation about justice. And it's an interesting conversation. Socrates poses the question, he says, why do we teach our children to be just? Now, keep in mind, Socrates and Adamantes are talking in a scenario where they're really arguing from a humanist perspective, not from the perspective of God or any kind of eternal justice, just from here and now. Why do we teach our children to be just? Because justice is not really, as Socrates says, it's not really what we want for our children, is it? Because justice stands up to power that can crush them. Justice will often have to be at odds with wealth that will make them uncomfortable. Justice can sometimes get you thrown in prison and exiled and cast out. Is that what we want for our children? Do we want our children to be crushed and uncomfortable and exiled and thrown in prison? And then Adamantes says, well, no, that's not what we want. We want our children to be happy and prosperous. And so Socrates suggests that what we really want is not justice. What we want is the appearance of justice. What we want is our children to act justly when it's suitable and everyone can see them act justly. But when injustice is appropriate and they can conceal it, then they should act unjustly. Because what we want is not justice. We want the well-being of our children more than anything. It's a question of motivation. The motivation of the heart. And so too is the pure heart for God. Why? Why do we say that we want God? It's easy to say that we want Jesus Christ when we're in a room full of people who also say that they want Jesus Christ. It's even beneficial for us to be able to say we want Jesus Christ in a room like this. But what would we say if we were in a Middle Eastern desert in hostile territory with our family violently at stake? Would it still be the singular desire of our hearts to confess and claim and cling to Christ? See, those who are pure in heart may not be praised by others. Those who are pure in heart, in fact, are probably not as wealthy as others. Those who are pure in heart may not be as well educated as others. In fact, the pure in heart are usually the least noticeable among us. They usually die in obscurity. But the one good thing that the pure of heart have going for them is that they, like the rest of us, will get the desire of their heart. They'll see God. Which is why Jesus says this. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God.